My children tried to put me in a nursing home until the lawyer read one hidden page. The brochure hit the kitchen table at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon. I know because I was watching the clock, waiting for my daughter Michelle to leave so I could finally breathe in my own house. Sunset Valley Senior Living, it said, in cheerful yellow letters across the front. Below that, a photo of elderly people playing checkers and smiling like they'd never been happier. Michelle slid it toward me with her perfectly manicured fingernails, the ones she got done every 2 weeks at that expensive salon downtown, the same salon I used to take her to when she was 16 and wanted to feel grown up. She looked at me with what I can only describe as practiced sympathy, the kind you see on the faces of salespeople trying to convince you that what you're about to lose is actually a gift. Mom, we've talked about this, she said, and her voice had that edge to it, the one that meant she'd already made up her mind and this conversation was just a formality. You're 73 years old. You had that fall last month. What if something happens and nobody's here? What if you break your hip or worse? My son Marcus stood behind her, nodding like one of those bobblehead dolls people put on their dashboards. He wouldn't even look me in the eye, just stood there with his arms crossed in his expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, looking at a spot somewhere above my left shoulder. It's for the best, Ma, he added, and I wanted to laugh because he only called me Ma when he was trying to sound caring, like we were in some heartwarming TV movie instead of my kitchen where I'd raised him, fed him, sat up with him through every fever and nightmare and broken heart. I picked up the brochure, my hand steady even though something cold was spreading through my chest. The fall Michelle mentioned, I tripped over the rug in the hallway, the same rug that had been there for 20 years, because I was rushing to answer the phone when she called, calling to tell me she couldn't make it for dinner again. I'd caught myself on the wall, barely stumbled, didn't even get a bruise. But she'd blown it up into this whole catastrophic event, told Marcus I was declining, used words like cognitive impairment and safety concerns. I looked at the pictures in the brochure, really looked at them. Shared rooms, scheduled activities, medication management. The starting cost was listed at the back, small print, $6,800 per month for basic care. I'd done the math in my head immediately. That was my entire pension, plus the rental income from the 2 properties I owned downtown. The properties my late husband Robert and I had spent 30 years building, sacrificing vacations and new cars and fancy dinners so our children would have something solid under their feet when we were gone. How long have you been planning this? I asked, and my voice came out calmer than I felt. Michelle glanced at Marcus, and in that split second of eye contact, I saw it all. This wasn't a sudden decision made out of concern. This was coordinated, rehearsed, planned. We've been worried for months, Michelle said, but she couldn't quite meet my eyes either now. You're forgetting things, Mom. Last week, you called me twice about the same doctor's appointment. And you're lonely here. At Sunset Valley, you'd have friends, activities, people your own age. What I'd actually done was call her once to confirm she was driving me to my appointment, and then called again 3 hours later when she hadn't shown up and wasn't answering her texts. But I'd driven myself like I'd been driving for 55 years and made it there just fine. The loneliness comment was rich coming from her. I saw Michelle maybe twice a month, always rushed, always checking her phone. Marcus came by even less, usually just dropping off his kids for me to babysit, which I loved doing, but he'd swoop in and out like I was a convenient service, not his mother. I set the brochure down and folded my hands on top of it. Before you decide whether you're on my side or theirs, let me tell you something. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever been dismissed by people who were supposed to love you, then you'll understand what happened next. And if you've got a story like mine, drop a comment below and hit that subscribe button because you're going to want to see how this ends. I looked at my children, these 2 people I'd carried in my body, nursed through illnesses, celebrated every milestone with, and I made a decision. I smiled, small and quiet, and said the words that would change everything. "Okay," I said simply, "if that's what you think is best." The relief on their faces was almost insulting. Michelle actually exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. "Oh, Mom, thank you for being so understanding," she said, reaching across to pat my hand like I was a child who just agreed to eat her vegetables. "We've already put down a deposit. There's a room available on the third floor, and we can move you in by the end of the month. That gives us 2 weeks to pack up your things." 2 weeks? They'd already paid the deposit. This wasn't a discussion, it was an ambush. And they'd picked a room on the third floor, which meant they'd toured the place without me, had probably been planning this for months while I sat here thinking my children loved me enough to at least involve me in decisions about my own life. Marcus finally looked at me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe relief, but it was gone before I could name it. "We'll help you pack," he said. "And don't worry about the house. Michelle and I will handle selling it. You won't have to deal with any of that stress." Selling it? My house? The house where Robert and I brought both of them home from the hospital. The house where we'd painted Michelle's room pink 3 times because she couldn't decide on the right shade. The house where Marcus took his first steps in the kitchen, holding on to the edge of the counter. The house where Robert died 7 years ago in our bedroom upstairs, holding my hand and telling me he loved me right up until his last breath. They were going to sell it and split the money, I realized. This wasn't about my safety or my happiness. This was about convenience and money. My pension and rental income would go to Sunset Valley, and they'd split the house sale, probably a cool $850,000 for the house and the half-acre lot it sat on, and they'd convinced themselves they were doing the right thing the whole time. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I just nodded and said I was tired, and I'd talk to them more about the details tomorrow. Michelle hugged me, and I let her, feeling her expensive perfume fill my nose. The same perfume I'd bought her for Christmas last year, even though it cost $200 because she'd mentioned she liked it. Marcus patted my shoulder, and then they were gone, walking out to their luxury cars, probably already planning how they'd spend their inheritance. I stood at the kitchen window and watched them drive away, and then I went upstairs to my bedroom. I pulled out the locked metal box from the back of my closet, the one I hadn't opened in 3 years, and I started making phone calls. The first call was to my lawyer, Patricia Martinez. Patricia had been Robert's and my attorney for 25 years, had handled our wills, our property purchases, our business contracts. She was tough, smart, and she didn't suffer fools. When I told her what Michelle and Marcus were trying to do, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said something that made me smile for the first time in hours. "Jasmine, please tell me you still have the document we drew up in 2018? I looked down at the paper in my hand, the one I'd kept hidden in that locked box. "Right here in front of me," I said. "Good." Patricia replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Then we're going to teach your children a very important lesson about underestimating their mother." The next 2 weeks were interesting, to say the least. Michelle came by every other day with boxes and packing tape, going through my things like she was sorting inventory. She kept suggesting what I should donate or throw away, which really meant everything that had sentimental value but no monetary worth. Robert's baseball card collection? Worthless, she said. Nobody collects those anymore. The quilts my grandmother had made by hand? Too old-fashioned, they just collect dust. The photo albums from when the kids were young? We have everything digital now, Mom. No need to keep all this paper. I let her pack what she wanted. I smiled and nodded and played the part of the cooperative elderly mother who was grateful her children were taking charge. But at night, I was on the phone with Patricia, going over every detail of our plan. Marcus showed up less frequently, but when he did, he was all business. He brought a realtor to walk through the house, a blonde woman in her 40s who kept saying things like "great bones" and "excellent location" while mentally calculating her commission. They talked about me like I wasn't sitting right there in my own living room. "We'll need to clear out all the personal items before we list it," the realtor said. Stage it with neutral furniture, fresh paint, maybe update the kitchen. Marcus nodded along, and I watched him calculate figures on his phone. My son, the financial analyst, already spending money he hadn't earned. "When are you moving to Sunset Valley?" the realtor asked me directly. And I could see she was trying to be kind, but there was an edge of impatience to it, like I was an obstacle in the way of her sale. "End of the month," I said quietly. 2 weeks from today. I visited Sunset Valley once during those 2 weeks. Michelle insisted on taking me, showing me around like it was a resort instead of a place where people went to wait to die. The staff were friendly enough, but I could see the reality behind the brochure pictures. The shared rooms were tiny. The activities were bingo and chair exercises. The dining hall smelled like overcooked vegetables and disinfectant. My room, the one they'd already reserved for me, had a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out at the parking lot. "Isn't it nice?" Michelle asked brightly. "And look, they have a TV mounted on the wall. You love watching your shows." I did love my shows. I watched them on the 65-inch television Robert and I had bought 3 years ago, sitting on my comfortable couch in my own living room where I could pause whenever I wanted, and make tea in my own kitchen and use my own bathroom without asking permission. But I smiled and said, "It's very nice, sweetheart." She squeezed my hand, and I could feel how relieved she was, how proud of herself for handling this so smoothly. That night, I had dinner with my best friend, Eleanor, who'd been my friend since Michelle was in diapers. Eleanor knew everything. She'd watched this whole situation unfold with increasing fury. "You're really going through with the plan?" she asked over coffee and the chicken parmesan I'd made, one of my last dinners in my kitchen. "Every bit of it," I said. "Patricia has everything ready." Eleanor shook her head. "I can't believe Michelle and Marcus are doing this after everything you've done for them." I thought about everything: the college tuitions I'd paid, the down payment I'd given Michelle for her first house, the business loan I'd co-signed for Marcus when no bank would give him credit, the countless hours of free babysitting, the money I'd lent that was never paid back, the sacrifices made so they could have better lives than Robert and I had. The day finally came, moving day. Marcus rented a U-Haul truck, and Michelle arrived at 8 a.m. with coffee and muffins from the expensive bakery downtown, like this was a celebration. They'd hired 2 young men to do the heavy lifting, and I watched as they carried out my furniture, my belongings, 50 years of life packed into boxes and loaded onto a truck. Most of it wouldn't even come with me to Sunset Valley. Michelle had arranged for an estate sale for next weekend. Everything I owned would be picked over by strangers looking for bargains. The only things going to my small room at the facility were my clothes, a few photos, and my television. Everything else would be sold or thrown away. At noon, we drove to Patricia Martinez's office downtown. This was supposedly to sign some final paperwork, transfer power of attorney, handle the legal details of the house sale. Michelle and Marcus thought this was just a formality. They sat in Patricia's conference room, confident and relaxed. Marcus was checking his phone, probably texting the realtor. Michelle was asking Patricia about timeline, about when the house could be listed. Patricia smiled at them both, professional and calm, and said, "Before we get to that, there's one document that needs to be reviewed. It's a codicil to your mother's estate plan drawn up in 2018 that significantly impacts the current situation." I watched my children's faces as Patricia slid a folder across the table. Michelle opened it first, and I saw her eyes start to scan the page, then go back to the top, then scan it again like she couldn't believe what she was reading. Marcus leaned over to read over her shoulder, and I watched the color drain from his face. "What is this?" Michelle asked, and her voice had gone up an octave. Patricia looked at me, and I nodded. She turned back to my children and explained in her calm, professional attorney voice.
This is a legally binding document that states very clearly that if, at any point, Jasmine's children attempt to place her in a nursing home or assisted living facility without a documented medical necessity signed by at least 2 independent physicians, her entire estate will be immediately transferred to the charitable foundation she established in your father's name. The silence in that room was beautiful. Marcus found his voice first. "You can't do this," he said, but it came out weak, uncertain. "She already did," Patricia replied. "5 years ago. The document is ironclad. I wrote it myself, and it's been witnessed, notarized, and filed with the county." Michelle's hands were shaking now, making the papers rustle. "But we've already paid the deposit at Sunset Valley. We've rented the truck. We've started the estate sale." "Then you've made some expensive mistakes," I said, and it was the first time I'd spoken since we'd entered the office. They both turned to look at me, and I saw something new in their eyes now. Not love, not concern, but panic and anger. "You did this on purpose," Michelle said, and there was an edge to her voice I'd never heard before, something sharp and ugly. "You knew about this the whole time, and you let us go through with all of it." I stood up slowly, using the table for support, not because I needed it, but because I wanted them to really look at me, to see what they tried to do to their own mother. "Yes," I said, clearly. "I let you pack up my house. I let you reserve a room in that facility. I let you plan your estate sale and count your inheritance. I wanted you to see exactly how far you were willing to go. I wanted to see if either of you would stop, would question whether this was right, would ask me what I actually wanted. But you didn't. You never asked what I wanted. You told me what was going to happen, and you expected me to be grateful for it." Marcus stood up too, his face flushed red. "We were trying to help you. We were trying to make sure you were safe." "No," I said, and my voice was steady even though my heart was pounding. "You were trying to make things convenient for yourselves. You were trying to
Liquidate me like I was an asset. Turn me into monthly checks to a facility so you wouldn't have to actually take care of me or spend time with me. You were trying to get control of my money, my property, everything your father and I spent a lifetime building." The truth of it hung in the air between us. Patricia started explaining the details. The charitable foundation was real. I'd set it up 5 years ago, after Robert died, when I'd started to see how Michelle and Marcus looked at my house, my properties, my pension. The foundation supported causes Robert had cared about: veteran services, children's literacy programs, animal shelters. If the nursing home clause was triggered, every penny I owned would go to that foundation. My house, my rental properties, my savings, my life insurance, everything. My children would get nothing. "You can contest it," Patricia continued, "but I'll tell you right now, you won't win. The document is legal, it's valid, and Jasmine is clearly of sound mind. She's demonstrated that quite effectively over the past 2 weeks by letting you dig your own hole." Michelle was crying now, but they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of rage and frustration. "So, what happens now?" she asked. "Now," I said, "you help me move my furniture back into my house. You cancel the estate sale, you forfeit your deposit at Sunset Valley, and you apologize, though I'm not sure I'm ready to accept those apologies yet." "And if we don't?" Marcus asked. I looked at my son, at the man I'd raised to be better than this. "Then I trigger the clause anyway, because if you're not willing to undo what you've done, then you're proving you only cared about the money in the first place. And I'd rather give every penny to charity than reward you for trying to throw me away." They moved my furniture back. It took all afternoon and well into the evening. The same 2 young men they'd hired to pack the truck now unpacked it, probably confused about what kind of family drama they'd walked into. Marcus barely spoke. Michelle cried on and off, though I noticed she made sure to cry where I could see her, like she was still trying to manipulate the situation.
When the last box was back in my house, when my couch was back in my living room, and my dishes were back in my kitchen cabinets, I stood in my doorway and watched them get ready to leave. "Mom," Michelle started, but I held up my hand. "Not now," I said. "I need time to think about whether I even want you in my life anymore." The look on her face told me she'd finally understood. This wasn't about the money anymore. This was about trust, about love, about whether the bond between parent and child could survive this kind of betrayal. They left without another word. I closed my door and locked it, something I'd never done before when they were inside. Eleanor came over an hour later with wine and takeout, and we sat in my living room, in my house, and she raised her glass to me. "To Jasmine Roberts," she said, "the woman who taught her children that she was not to be underestimated." We clinked glasses, and I felt something loosen in my chest. I was still in my home, I was still in control of my life, and my children had learned a valuable lesson about respect. That was 4 months ago. Michelle has called me 17 times. I've answered twice. Both conversations were brief, full of her apologies and explanations, how she'd been stressed, how she thought she was doing the right thing, how she loved me and just wanted what was best. I listened, and then I told her I'll call her when I was ready. Marcus called less, but he sent a letter, handwritten, 3 pages long. In it, he admitted he'd been thinking about the money. He admitted he'd been calculating his inheritance, planning what he'd do with it, and he'd lost sight of the fact that I was a person, not a balance sheet. He said he was ashamed. He said he understood if I never forgave him. I haven't responded yet. I keep the letter in my kitchen drawer, and sometimes I read it when I'm drinking my morning coffee. My granddaughter Sophia, Marcus's oldest daughter, came to visit last week. She's 16 now, and she'd heard some version of the story from her parents. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table her grandfather used to sit at, and she asked me directly, "Grandma, did Dad really try to put you in a nursing home?" I poured her some lemonade and sat down across from her. "Yes," I said, "he did." "That's messed up," she said, and I loved her honesty. "It was," I agreed. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are you going to forgive them?" It was the question I'd been asking myself every day for 4 months. "I don't know yet," I told her honestly. Forgiveness isn't something you owe people just because they're family. It's something you give when they've earned it, when they've shown real change, not just regret at getting caught. Sophia nodded slowly, processing this. "I'm sorry they did that to you. You're like the coolest grandma ever. You taught me how to drive stick shift, and you let me watch R-rated movies when I was 13, and you never treated me like a kid." I smiled at that because it was true. I'd always treated my grandchildren like people, with respect and honesty. Maybe that's where I'd gone wrong with my own children. Or maybe I'd done everything right and they'd still chosen to be selfish. I wasn't sure anymore. Before Sophia left, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Don't let them push you around, Grandma. You're tougher than all of us." And maybe I am. Maybe that's what 50 years of marriage, raising children, building a life, and losing a husband teaches you. How to be tough when you need to be. I still live in my house. I still collect rent from my properties downtown, and that money sits in my account, growing, waiting. Patricia and I meet once a month for lunch, and we review my estate plan, make sure everything is still in order. The charitable foundation is thriving. I've gotten more involved with it, attending board meetings, approving grants. Last month, we funded a literacy program for underprivileged kids in the school district where Michelle used to teach before she quit to become a full-time mother. I wonder if she knows that her inheritance is teaching children to read. I wonder if that irony ever crosses her mind. I've started doing things I always wanted to do, but never had time for when I was raising kids and helping Robert with his business. I joined a book club. I take a watercolor painting class on Thursday afternoons. I volunteer at the animal shelter, the one that will benefit from my estate when I'm gone. I'm living my life on my terms, not waiting to be managed or handled or put somewhere conveniently. And I'm happy, genuinely happy, in a way I wasn't when I was constantly worrying about whether my children loved me enough to visit, whether I was being a good enough mother, whether I was a burden to them. Here's what I've learned through all of this. Your worth is not determined by whether other people appreciate what you've done for them. Your value doesn't decrease because someone failed to see it. And you are never too old to stand up for yourself, to set boundaries, to demand respect. My children thought I was weak because I was older, because I was alone after Robert died, because I was their mother, and mothers are supposed to sacrifice everything. But strength isn't about how much you can endure. It's about knowing when to say enough. If you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel invisible by your own family, if you've ever been dismissed or taken for granted or treated like you're past your expiration date, I want you to know something. You matter. Your life matters. Your choices matter. And you have every right to protect yourself, even from the people who are supposed to love you the most. Will I eventually forgive Michelle and Marcus? Maybe, probably. They're
still my children, and some part of me will always love them despite what they tried to do. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It means acknowledging what happened, accepting that they showed me who they really are, and deciding whether I want people like that in my life moving forward. For now, I'm taking it day by day. I'm living in my home, I'm managing my own money, I'm making my own choices. And I'm showing my children that their 73-year-old mother is smarter, tougher, and more capable than they ever gave her credit for. That hidden page in my estate plan, that wasn't just a legal document, it was a test, and they failed it spectacularly. But I passed. I protected myself, I stood my ground, and I'm still standing. So if you've made it this far in my story, do me a favor. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me your own story of standing up to family. Hit that like button if you believe respect should go both ways, regardless of age. And subscribe to this channel because I've got more stories to tell, more lessons learned the hard way, and more proof that getting older doesn't mean getting weaker. My name is Jasmine Roberts. I'm 73 years old. I live in my own house, make my own decisions, and refuse to be anyone's burden or anyone's payday. And if my children are watching this, and I suspect they might be, I want them to know something. The door isn't locked forever, but it won't open again until you understand that I'm not just your mother. I'm a person. I deserve respect. I deserve honesty. I deserve to be treated like my life still has value, because it does. It has more value now than ever before, because I finally learned to value it myself. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Never.